is difficult to keep a dog caged when they were meant to be set free. When a dog is unable to run around, cramped in a box, deprived of empathy, it will try to gain freedom by pushing against the cage. Emily Bronte pushed against the constraints of society, resisting her situation of suppression as a woman in the 18th century, by looking towards writing as an outlet from her isolation, discovering comfort and freedom through it.
Emily Bronte constructs Wuthering Heights as a metaphorical escape from the conventional restrictions and material comforts of the upper class, to emphasize the idea that materialism does not always equal comfort. It's evident by the separation of the upper and lower classes of society that both classes are still restricted by social norms of love, status, and wealth. Expressly shown in Heathcliff as a child, his status as an orphan dictates his place in society, as he lacks family and money. He is limited in his power to make choices of his own will without the support of the upper classes. Hindley drove him from their company to the servants, deprived him of the instructions of the curate, and insisted that he should labor out of doors instead. If he were careless and uncared for before Catherine's absence, he had been 10 times more so since. With him identified as part of the lower classes, society prevents Heathcliff from being together with Catherine, because she's out of his league, he has no money, and thus cannot support her. He might as well skulk behind the settle on beholding such a bright, graceful damsel enter the house, instead of a rough-headed counterpart of himself, as he expected. Heathcliff is also a representation of the upper class once he becomes an adult. It is apparent with Heathcliff's mysterious return with wealth that he sought to turn his situation around. Driven by anger and isolation, he was determined to gain something of himself, to find the comfort he was forsaken as a child. He finally puts his plan into action, showing off and making Edgar jealous for just a few perks. Taking over Wuthering Heights by manipulating his ruined former abuser Hindley, manipulating his son Linton, and his relationship with Cathy, and therein resulting in him taking over Thrushcross Grange. However, the fact that Heathcliff is wealthy and has a lot of property doesn't mean he's intact as a person. In fact, he appears to victimize himself and shows growing signs of delirium. To Catherine, as he grasps her arm so tightly he creates bruises along her skin, he says, "Is it not sufficient for your infernal selfishness that while you are at peace I shall writhe in the torments of hell?" Heathcliff wants acceptance from the one he loves, but it's the one thing Catherine can't give him, as she permanently creates a wall between them when she marries Edgar. And so, Heathcliff's ability to gain everything, wealth, power, property, except his happiness, slowly eats at him. Materialism that embodies greed and vengeance fails to give rise to redemption, which Heathcliff learns the hard way with his toying of the relationships of the next generation.
The ideas of both upper and lower classes are almost completely irrelevant when determining somebody's success or overall outcome of their life, as the situations can quickly reverse themselves. Heathcliff, in his early life, was defined as an orphan, as well as by his lack of wealth. By his adult years, he became defined as wealthy and patriarchal, but was neither happy nor very successful in either season. Heathcliff's ultimate goal, after the loss of Catherine, as a child and at her death, is to gain redemption by influencing the lives of others, and thus end his own suffering. He wishes to be freed from his misery and attempts to achieve this second chance through the people around him, specifically Cathy and Linton. He projects his wants and desires onto others in his life through deception and manipulation, but fails to redeem a desired result. By projecting this negativity onto Linton, who is weak already, he further corrupts the boy and shapes Linton into a shadow of his own former self, and restricts him from the life he could have had with Cathy. Heathcliff went up once to show her Linton's will. He had bequeathed the whole of his, and what had been her, movable property to his father. The poor creature was threatened or coaxed into that act during her week's absence when his uncle died. Inadvertently, it causes Heathcliff to also deteriorate as a human being, eventually destroying both how other people view him and who he is as a person. Heathcliff eventually gets Hareton caught up in this mess. Despite raising Hareton with restrictions to education and force of labor, because Hareton was unable to create connections with those superior to him, he found Heathcliff's abuse as his only source of companionship for most of his life. But poor Hareton, the most wrong, he was the only one who really suffered much. He sat by the corpse all night, sleeping in bed early. He presses its hand and kissed the sarcastic, savage face that everyone else shrank from contemplating. In contrast to Heathcliff, who further incited the separation and inequality between classes, Cathy and Hareton were brought together as friends, ignoring the class division, and eventually defined themselves by their love and desire to be together, more than their cumulative wealth and land. Hinted by the similarities in the monikers Cathy and Catherine, Hareton and Heathcliff, the younger two were both originally on a miserable path to repeat the steps of Catherine and Heathcliff's lives, where society's norms of class and love would have kept them apart. But because of Hareton's desire for education and Cathy's determination to regain her property, they ended the monotony of misery by diverging from the path. "Your land, you insolent slut! You never had any," said Heathcliff. "And my money," she continued, returning his angry glare. "And Hareton's land, and his money," pursued the reckless thing. "Hareton and I are friends now, and I shall tell him all about you." Their relationship is different from Catherine and Heathcliff's, which was full of passion, but allowed society to dictate their lives. Cathy and Hareton struggled to resist the monotony of misery, bailing themselves to be freed from society's ideals of association. Heathcliff's life is overall defined as a failure to redeem himself and a failure in passing on his legacy to those after him, evident in the independence of both Cathy and Hareton. However, by attempting to recreate and fix his mistakes, he inadvertently assists in redeeming Cathy and Hareton, who are the ones who truly win in life.
Heathcliff never actually achieves true happiness, although he was ruler of his house and was very wealthy. He failed to achieve it throughout his life, even with his success, as the only sign of his happiness came through interaction with Catherine before she died, when they were young and as rude as savages. Cathy's destiny as the next Catherine, who was full of spite and passion, deprives her of the perception to be her own person, separate from who Catherine was. However, Cathy does not allow this to control her life, and uses her compassion, something that the other Catherine lacked, to build up Hareton. The two finally overcome society with their support of one another, Hareton receiving an education, and Cathy eventually gaining ownership of the houses. Although Heathcliff did attempt to break free from suppression, he and Catherine still allowed society to separate them, instead of working together to destabilize the structure that they had for so long unquestioned.